My name is Marja Elsinga and I'm a full professor in Housing Institutions and Governance at the Faculty of Architecture of the Delft University of Technology. And I'm eager to introduce housing governance to you. A home is a basic need that provides access to society and well-being. And housing governance deals with how to organize adequate housing for people and societies. And let us first look into some key dimensions of housing. Housing is a physical structure. It is part of the neighborhood, part of the built environment, and therefore using scarce materials and consuming or producing energy. So housing is part of planning and energy policy. Secondly, it is part of the economy. Housing production is a substantial part of economic turnover, and it also is a large part of housing consumption. A substantial part of incomes of households influence the purchasing power in society. Therefore, housing support is often meant for economic growth. Last but surely not least, and the focus of this contribution, housing is a human right, embedded in many national constitutions. Housing is part of welfare policies. And the governance of housing deals with steering of organization and people towards an aim using instruments and controls. Features of organizations are they are public or private, formal, informal, and for-profit or non-profit. See the dotted lines in this figure. There are three types of organization involved. The first is states, governments. They are controlled by politicians that are elected and selected according to country regulations. Housing can be on local, provincial, national, and federal government agendas. And these organizations are public, formal, and not-for-profit. Second is the market. This implies all kinds of for-profit organizations in housing provision and housing management. They are private, formal, and for-profit. And then the communities. They imply local communities, families who take care of each other in an informal way. Grassroots housing initiatives and informal settlements are typical examples of this. They are private, informal, and not-for-profit. In the last decades, the role of markets and governments were dominant in the worldwide debate on housing. However, in current debates, the role of community is more and more emphasized and connected to stable living environments. So, if we look at the role of the government, there are different roles. Governments can regulate housing, they can subsidize or regulate housing providers, and they can cooperate with private partners. We see here four types of roles for the government. The first block on the left bottom represents traditional public administration. The government as a regulator is steering the provision of affordable housing into society where the government is creating conditions. Public rental housing built and owned by government is a typical example of this. The second block relates to the performing role of governments and represents new public management, dominance in the last decades, where governments focus on results and aim to stimulate the market. A typical example is government providing income-dependent housing allowances for households, subsidies that do not disturb the market functioning. The third block represents new network governance, where the government seeks cooperation with organizations in society, such as public-private partnerships. Then the last block represents a resilient society, with a government that responds to social initiatives, for example, collaborative housing or incremental housing. The key is that governments support societal initiatives with funding and/or with regulation. This overview makes clear that governments can apply and combine different roles, as will be demonstrated in 3 concrete cases. Subsidizing low-income homeowners is combined with issuing a horizontal property law to facilitate cooperation between residents, as is the case for the low-income condominium housing in Ecuador and Colombia. The second example demonstrates a dominant role for the government in the provision of public rental housing in China. It emphasizes the importance of the different layers of government. It also demonstrates the challenge to produce livable neighborhoods and involve tenants. The third example emphasizes empowering the residents and the government as a facilitator. In the case of incremental housing in South Africa, it demonstrates the power of this approach, but also the division between those benefiting more and those less. Studying housing governance across the world shows that details and effects of policies depend to a large extent on the local context. Principles, however, are quite the same, so lessons for mutual learning. It is about homes for people that contribute to well-being and stability. Therefore, I'm proud to present 3 experts studying housing governance in the context of their origin with experience of doing a PhD in Delft.
Hello, my name is Rosalina Dornoso. I work as a guest professor at Flaxo, Ecuador, teaching urban law and planning. And since 2001, I work as a consultant for the Unity of Human Settlements of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Housing policy, both in Ecuadorian and Colombian governments, focuses on facilitating homeownership by regulating the market and providing subsidies. Both private and public sector, the ministry or the municipality, are involved in reducing quantitative housing deficits of lower income population. Affordable owner-occupied dwellings are not single unit or individual, they are collective. And they are sold to households using condominium tenure. By law, condos always require a homeowners association to organize the common property. Therefore, housing governance includes actors related to condominium institutions. Management of collective housing in condominium is costly and complicated. Many government-supported blocks of affordable dwellings for low-income people and now are badly maintained and therefore deteriorate within a couple of years after delivery. This problem was the driver question of my PhD work. In Colombia, the formal rules of the game are clearer than in Ecuador, but professionals' responsibilities in starting the management of the condominium before selling them to the low-income household. Therefore, affordable housing in Bogota, Colombia is better maintained than those in Ecuador. This demonstrates the importance of good governance for housing beyond the delivery of new built housing units. Therefore, evidence of sustainable practices for governance and condominium are important outcomes of good governance and management of housing policy implementation.
I'm Juan Yan from Shanghai, China. Currently, I am a postdoc researcher in the Faculty of Architecture and Urban Planning at Tongji University. My research interests are housing policy and social or public housing governance in urban areas. Chongqing, located in the Midwest of China, is a pilot city of public rental housing provision in China. Recently, the increased delegation of government tasks to other actors has shifted the public rental housing provision from government to governance. In the meantime, the current public rental housing governance has achieved mixed results. The local governments have put a lot of efforts into public rental housing provision while problems still exist. For example, the poor housing quality and the marginalized locations of public rental housing projects in the urban areas. A clear understanding of public rental housing governance is the key to solve these problems. My driver to do a PhD on this topic. Based on the literature of governance and the empirical data collected from Chongqing, we found out that the current public rental housing governance in Chongqing is still dominated by the government. However, in contrast to the past, rather than applying state logic only, the three levels of government in China increasingly apply different logics derived from the literature. Only the central government still applies the state logic. Due to the lack of sufficient finance and the human resources, local levels resort to the market and civil society logics. As a result, the Chinese government, the three levels, functions in the roles of state, market, and civil society actors, all at the same time. The latter two roles are realized by three new forms of hybrid actors that have come into existence. These hybrid actors are linked to different levels of government in different ways. They are owned, regulated by, and/or subordinated to the level of government concerned.
My name is Sophie Wilcox. I'm a PhD candidate from TU Delft. My research is based on the governance of incremental housing in Johannesburg, South Africa. This is the reality of the spatial and economic inequality of Johannesburg. It is typical of most South African cities. The red is Sandton, the wealthiest square mile in Africa. The yellow is Alexander Township and its informal settlement. Residents here live on less than €6 per day per household. South Africa has the highest rate of inequality with a Gini coefficient of 63. There is a massive deficit in affordable, adequate housing in this country. This is an image of the informal settlement upgrading interventions of the Ministry of Human Settlements. One of these interventions is the K206 case study, incremental housing case study that has tackled issues of housing affordability, governance, and management through strong participative processes. The idea here is to allow people to expand their own homes as and when it makes sense to their financial situations. It is a project that aims to empower the low-income residents of Alexander and bridge the inequality gap to provide for better livelihoods for all. Thank you.
Final observations and conclusions. Some countries address policies for lower income households by rental housing. Others do so by home ownership. The choice for policy is closely connected to the dominant political ideology in a country. Social, democratic, socialist being more oriented towards rental housing, and conservative, liberal more towards home ownership. The Chinese case demonstrates public rental, strong government regulation, and tensions between layers of government. Central government aiming for stability in society, local government focused on earning money. So large-scale top-down public rental housing is efficiently organized, where the challenge is the livability and involvement of the tenants. Ecuador and Colombia focus on home ownership in the form of condominium housing. A concern here is the management of the collective housing, how to safeguard the maintenance and livability in these neighborhoods. It is a real challenge to find a balance between legal conditions and community initiatives. South Africa demonstrates incremental housing as a way to reduce social and economic inequality. There is a strong role for residents in neighborhood development. The preliminary results of this research show that some substantially benefit from this incremental strategy by income generation and living conditions, and others way less. During the last decades of globalization and financialization of housing, the economic dimension of housing became the dominant one. Housing for economic growth and housing as a source of income seem to be more important than housing as a human right. However, global trends, needs, and pressures make housing as ingredients for well-being and stable societies more important, and therefore the need for knowledge on housing governance is gaining interest. This video teaches that housing governance need to be tailor-made, accommodating local trends and institutions, but at the same time that there are joint principles for adequate housing. Combine top-down regulation and bottom-up requirements for livable neighborhoods. And if it comes to budget, do not allocate only focusing on bare numbers, but on chances for livable neighborhoods. The challenge is to find a balance in aim, roles, and instruments in housing governance to maximize well-being for people and societies. Thank you.